Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
I am pumped to have my friend and former mentee, Eric Lindsey, on Mobile Home Parks in Real Life. Eric is an interesting case, and I'll tell you why. Eric wasn't really a traditional real estate guy when I met him. He was someone who, he had whatever that magic in a bottle was, and was doing all the right things. And I think over the couple of years I've known him and the time we spent together in my mentorship program, I think the number one thing he would tell you that he got out of my mentorship program, or at least the number one thing I wanted to focus on with him, was mindset. Because if you are the biggest operator in the world, an owner and operator in the world, you probably have mindset issues. If you are just starting out, you have mindset issues. If you're anywhere in between, mindset. You have to believe. And I told Eric when I went on his podcast, my friend, you had and have that magic in a bottle. You just got to see it. You just got to see it. So Eric, those who don't know who you are, tell the world.
Yeah, so first off, thanks, Ryan, for the intro and allowing me to be a visitor on your show. I am truly honored to be a guest here. Just a little bit about my background. So I have 17 years of construction experience, and I'm currently still a W-2 employee. I jumped into the real estate space just kind of out of turbulent waters. Wasn't 100% sure how I was going to make sure that my family was well provided for. Within the construction arena, it is somewhat seasonal. And so I would find myself out of work. And eventually, after one too many layoffs, I decided I've got to do something different. I have to kind of secure my family. And so I started searching around for different strategies in which I can invest on the side while I'm doing my W-2 income. And eventually I stumbled into real estate. I jumped into Bigger Pockets and started listening to a ton of podcast episodes, and they offer a lot of value, but sometimes they can confuse you a little bit because there's just so many different niches being thrown at you. And so eventually I decided that I was going to just nail it down and I was going to get 100% into wholesaling. And so that kind of led me down the path of really just kind of staying focused on wholesaling. And soon, while I was on that path, I ran across a podcast that was 100% focused on mobile home parks. And so it was a large operator, and he was incentivizing those that were listening to his podcast that if you run across a deal, he would pay you out a referral fee or a finder's fee. And so since I was early in the path of education, I was really just trying to figure out exactly how to do deals. And that really intrigued me. And so I began to venture down that path of trying to find a mobile home park space. I didn't know a whole lot. I just knew I had a guy on the podcast that offered a great deal. And so I started sourcing deals. I jumped into the Google online, and I started going through and just looking up mobile home parks. I got on mhvillage.com and just start calling through, going directly to the park managers and getting through to the wayside quite often. But I continued to persevere. And not long after starting that pursuit, I ended up getting in front of a seller. And it was a pretty unique exercise there. And the seller, he owned a 600 space mobile home park. And I was able to kind of pair the seller with the podcast operator that was a big mobile home park syndicator. And I was able to break into the mobile home park space that way. Long story short, he basically paid me out $125,000 for connecting him to a seller. And they ended up acquiring the mobile home park. And I put in like all of 5 hours on this whole deal. And I was able to be paid out $125,000. From there, I was kind of off to the races. I continued down the path of education. I continued down the path of wholesaling, started a single family residential wholesaling business. And I really kind of kicked myself in the pants because I wish I would have stayed on the path of pursuing mobile home parks, because this was maybe 6 years ago, something to that effect. And eventually I did end up buying my own mobile home park. But because of lack of education, I ended up getting into a cash crunch and I just liquidated it. But to bring us to a more recent, to the deal that you're speaking about, Ryan, the mobile home park that I just recently closed on, it was right at 78 units. And it was located in a good area. But this mobile home park, it was a unique transaction, just as the first, and just as many of the deals that I've had to close. And it was very turbulent. So I first got the lead through my wife because we cold call. And so she had reached out to me and said that she may have a solid lead, and she wanted me to contact the guy. And so I contacted him, and it was really sweet. I mean, everything was just going off without a hitch. The seller was an 81-year-old gentleman that had owned the park for right at about 30 years. He owned it free and clear, I believe. And he said that just send the contract over. And so, it was just so easy initially. And so I ended up sending the contract over. We had kind of talked about the terms and things like that. I sent it over to him and there was nothing. And so I was expecting it to come back because that was the agreement. He was going to sign it and send it back and we was going to be off to the races. But after a week or so of just dead silence, I decided to call him up. And so when I called him up, the big hang up with him was, first off, that I was out of state. I was quite a ways away from him. And with him being an older seller, it just didn't really sit that well with him, with me being so far away. And so after we kind of talked, I was able to discover that was the biggest thing holding us up. He wanted to do the deal. He wanted to sell the property, but I was just so far away. And it seemed a little odd since he was 81. And typically a lot of the older guys, as you know, Ryan, and the mom and pops, they like to kind of get belly to belly. They want to see you. A lot of times they want to deal with local individuals. And that was hanging him up from signing the contract. And so I just kind of put two and two together after making the call. After I discovered that was the hang up, I had to make a quick decision. And so the decision was that I was going to have to just risk it and fly all the way where he was at, catch 2 flights there, catch 2 flights back, risk not getting the contract signed. And I had to make a split decision. This was a Thursday, and I ended up flying out on Saturday. But once I positioned it and I pitched it to the seller, I asked him, I said, hey, if I come down and you're physically able to see me, will you sign the contract? And once I shared that with him, he immediately was at peace. And he said that, yes, he would sign. So I had nothing to go off of other than this older gentleman's word. But in the back of my mind, I've dealt with older sellers before, and I've dealt with mom and pop sellers. My first park, it was a mom and pop seller. She had got offered more than my price, but because we had a handshake, we had a verbal agreement, she stayed with me. She felt like she liked me. She felt like she knew me, and she felt like she trusted me, and she ended up selling me her part. And so that stored knowledge of previous transactions that I've done, I kind of leveraged that and I gambled. And so I caught the flights. I went to visit the park. It was as advertised. It was a nice park, 78 spaces. We got it at a really good price. And as I got down there, I reached out to the seller, and sure enough, he picks up the phone. I was at the hotel and he wasn't able to meet me the day that I got there, but we ended up going the next day. And so we met the next day. I brought the contract to him. He didn't even read the contract. He set it right there on his on the table and just looked it over and signed immediately. We was in and out within a 10 to 15 minute period. And I was heading back to the house, caught 2 more flights back home. And that's kind of what began the process. So if you want to kind of unpack a little bit more about the deal, I'm open to sharing whatever else you want to kind of touch on.
Do, Eric. And we're going to take a big step back before we go forward. First off, not my podcast. He's not referring to me. I was not the podcaster who he brought that deal to. 6 years, I don't even think I've had mobile home parks. I started in 2018, 4 years ago, because we recorded this in 2022. So I think I know who you brought that one to, but not really relevant. I think the more relevant thing that I want to hit before we talk about this individual deal, because there's a lot I want to talk about before we even talk about this deal that y'all should, who are tuning in, should know about Eric, is that behind the scenes, so Eric and I have known each other a couple of years, been friends a couple of years. And Eric is, if you can't tell just by the way he talks, he has, like, if you really know what you're listening for, you can just tell he has it. And it's the hustle, it's the enthusiasm, it's the energy, it's the I'm going to figure this out. Now, obviously, you come from construction, not from, you weren't an analyst from a big Fortune 500 company, REIT, whatever, right? Like, you were like me. I was a psych major and a car salesman. I didn't know I didn't even know what a cap rate was when I started out. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to do it. And I was like, I'm going to go figure it out. And you had that same mindset, but you took a step in the wrong direction. And you and I've talked about this more than once, and I'm going to share it. You got paid a nice 6-figure income. You immediately pay tax on that. That's a taxable event. You're not keeping 6 figures of $125,000. Mm-hmm. And that cash, as you can see, real estate's a rich person's game. It's very easy to be balance sheet rich and not have any cash. That happens all the time.
Yes.
And what you experienced was exactly that. You're like, this is a good lick, but what does this get me? And the answer is not a lot. And what you learned kind of on your own was, I need equity. Like, it's not, it's better to make $125,000 of equity than $125,000 fee.
Yes.
And you learn that. And I think the thing that has impressed me so much about you, Eric, beyond just that magic that you have, is the fact that was, 6 years ago. And it wasn't until this year where you really got back in the game in a big way. And I think that's because, like the millions of other people who would love to, have financial freedom, everybody does it wrong. Like, the overwhelming majority of people, they don't take the right steps. And like I mentioned on your podcast, I believe it's because they listen to people who don't have what they want, that they tell them, here's how you get what you want. And I think you, like me, were victim to, and again, it's not nefarious. It's not that they're lying to you or they're trying to deliberately mislead you most of the time. Sometimes they do. But you got advice from the wrong people over and over again. And your mindset wasn't a wealthy person's mindset, just like mine wasn't when I started out, just like most people who are listening into this. 125,000 bucks, that sounds great. And then you pay tax on it, and then it's gone.
Quickly.
Whereas if it's on your balance sheet, you ain't spending that. And, but you can now borrow off of that, and you can now tap into it when you need it. And, it took you years and years and years to get back to the point where you're like, man, I should have kept a sliver of that, or I should have tried to take it down on my own. And before we even get into this deal, one of my favorite, and I haven't told you this yet, one of my favorite moments of you in my mentorship program was when we were going through this deal, because this deal, by the way, is a mess, or was a mess to get closed for a whole bunch of reasons you're about to get in. One of my favorite moments, Eric, was I remember we had a long talk about why I think you just need to work on your mindset. That was a big breakthrough, I think, for you, but it wasn't just that one moment when we had that one conversation. It was that I saw you internalized it, because very shortly thereafter, you were like, Ryan, I got a deal. I'm not going to wholesale it. I'm going to find a way to take this down myself. Because I introduced you to a friend of mine who lives like an hour from that property and owned like 3 in that market, and was like, I want this. I'll pay a really fair fee. And I know for a fact you looked at that fee and you're like, sweet. And then you were like, no way. Because I told you, I was like, you really need to find a way to do this yourself. And I gave you an out. I gave you an easy path. Like, here's a friend of mine. He owns mobile home parks. He owns mobile home parks in this city. He really wants the deal. He will pay you a fair fee. This is easy, quick, easy money. And you said no. And that was my favorite moment. I haven't told you about that yet. That was my favorite moment of our friendship and you in my mentorship program, because you took what I taught you and you did it. And you did it. And I even feel a little bit guilty about giving you an easy way out, and you didn't take it. Oh my gosh. Like that is what makes me so proud to have you in my network of friends and fellow mobile home park owners, Eric. So I want to pay you that compliment, but I want folks listening in, before we even get into the nitty gritty of this, to know that there is a lot of behind the scenes stuff that Eric had to go through before he even got in touch with this mobile home park owner. And he, in effect, was a mobile home park owner for having wholesaled that one deal many years ago, and just went down the wrong path over and over and over again. But he didn't quit, and he didn't stop. And eventually, he started surrounding himself with folks that were on the right path or already had what he wanted. And I just really want to highlight that before we get in, because what we're about to talk about next is how hard this deal was for a lot of reasons. And I just really want everyone listening in to just know, Eric is a really special guy, yes, but you can be too. Because like Eric, you're probably also going through mindset issues. And, when I started in 2015, everybody was saying the same things people are saying now. Oh, it's a frothy market. Everyone's desperate for yield. Deals are so hard to find. They're overpriced. Everyone wants $1 billion. They're probably yada, yada. In the 7+ years I've been in this space, it has been really, really, really effing hard to buy anything unless you're willing to pay an insane amount of money. And what Eric did is exactly what you need to do. So let's break this down now that I've had a chance to kind of set the stage for who Eric is and what you should be listening for as you hear him talk. Eric, you cold called, you joined my mentorship program, you network like a fiend, so many different folks. You get a live lead several states away, and it gets to the point where, because I remember coaching you through this, you were like, here's a deal that pencils out. It's nowhere close. I don't know how I'm going to operate this. I don't know how I'm going to fund this. I don't have any banks. Ryan, what do I do? And I immediately introduced you to all my bankers in that area, because I own like an hour away. I introduced you to another friend of mine who owns in that space. Like, here's an out if you can't do this yourself, but obviously you did it yourself. So first off, you could call me to help you, but more importantly than that is you realized without anybody telling you, this individual has trust issues. He needs someone face to face. And I'm in Missouri and he's in wherever. I need to hop on a plane. I have a job and a wife and a life and a W-2 job. I'm going to take PTO. Eric, you spent money on a hotel, on an airline ticket, on probably Ubers, definitely food if you didn't rent a car. Like, just talk before we really even get into this. Just talk about the expenditures that you had before you even knew if you're going to put this thing under contract. But what, more importantly, like, how did you intuitively know I got to get in front of this person? And then on top of that, you freaking shut up with a contract, dude, and he signed it. Mm-hmm. Eric, what's going through your mind and how much risk did you take on? Like, how much did you spend? How much risk did you take on? How painful was that for you? Tell me everything. What was going through? How did it feel?
That's great. Yeah. So, Ryan, you're right there, buddy. It was stressful. Just kind of thinking this through, not knowing if I'm going to really secure this contract. He didn't trust me and I was cautious about him. But just kind of looking back at previous transactions from my wholesaling background. So it reminds me of a transaction I did with another older owner within the wholesaling arena. This gentleman, he asked me to give him $5,000 in his hand, not to the title company. And there was a lot of guys passing on the deal because no one wanted to give him $5,000 in his hand. And that's basically what he was asking me to do, is just trust me. I risked it. I gave him $5,000 in his hand and it worked out. I ended up wholesaling a fourplex and I made 50 grand off of that. Later down the line, I had another wholesaler reach out to me and was basically telling me that he was in and he was competing against me for the deal, but he wasn't willing to put $5,000 cash in this older gentleman's hand. And because I won the deal. And so it was those previous transactions and those previous actions that I took, previous dealings that I had with other older sellers, mom and pop. A lot of times those guys are just, they're handshake people. They just want to see you face to face. And with multiple business transactions that I've done with them, I can't really say that any of them has crossed me or went against their word. And so I'm sure there will be, and that's not going to be the story for everyone. But
until this one, because we're about to get into the fun part of this deal. But
yeah.
Yes.
So, but I ended up having to buy tickets to catch a flight, and that was about $1,000 out of pocket. I had to buy the hotel room. I rented a car, those kind of things. And let me mention this as well. It was Memorial Day weekend. So I had to give up my Memorial Day weekend that is traditional for, hey, it's time to lounge. It's time to go to the lake. It's time to barbecue, hang out with family. I gave up that to go chase a deal and do things that other people weren't willing to do.
I love that for a whole litany of reasons, but it's just like, man, if you really want something, there's not many things up there with breathing that are important to you. But if you really want it, it's pretty darn close to breathing. You got to want it pretty darn close to breathing. And you work a W-2 job, you got a family, you got a life. This is 2 flights away. It's $1,000. And I'm sure other things were inflated because everybody else is traveling, right? And the sacrifice, what I'm hearing, Eric, is the sacrifice you were making wasn't just the money. It was also the time with people you really cared about. Now, you've found a way to make the theme. What ladies and gentlemen, what you should be hearing is Eric found a creative way to get a deal done. And more specifically, he found a creative way to get a deal inked. Because as soon as it's inked, you now have some control. Because remember, real estate, people are irrational. And at the end of the day, like, you can't make someone sell you something. You can't do that. But as soon as they've mentally and physically and spiritually come to the point where they have now signed something, now all of a sudden you have things at your disposal to, if it comes down to it, you can sue and win to force someone to sell you their property once it's inked. And it gives you a little bit more control. And Eric, you found a way, you made a big risk for a lot of folks. That was several thousands of dollars to get there and put this thing under contract. And here's where that came from. That came from your experience cold calling. So for those of you who are newbies listening in, Eric was able to create a creative deal because he had a frame of reference from experiences past that allowed him to go, I've seen this situation before. I know what this needs to win. And so one thing that I can hear in Eric's story that I want others to also hear that may not be overly obvious is that Eric can speak so confidently to this story, but behind the scenes, all the fear and the doubt and the, oh my gosh, like, well, look at the sacrifices. He speaks in a very matter of fact, very confident way because he's seen it before. And the only way to get that frame of reference is to pick up the phone, to go and meet with people. And if you can't necessarily afford to jump on a flight, just cold call, within a couple hours of where you live and get that experience. Because here's now this story from my perspective, because he puts this under contract and then he comes on the group mentorship call. And now all of a sudden it was like, I hear the story and I'm like, Eric, oh my gosh, if you close this, you're coming on my podcast, dude. This is incredible, dude. Like, I love hearing this. But oh my gosh, what did you just do? Eric, what won the deal? And I remember this. You were like, Ryan, the guy said, I want to close in 30 days. I want non-refundable money. And then I'll sign your contract. We got to meet me face to face. I was like, you did everything right. It's just, you're not closing this thing in 30 days. It's not going to happen. Impossible, especially in 2022, for whatever reason. Like, everybody was refinancing at the beginning of the year and appraisals were like 45 days at a minimum. And they still are in September of 2022, by the way, when transaction volume slowed down. And I was like, Eric, dude, I don't even think you can get an appraisal here. And this dude is absolutely not seller financing for you. And you're taking a lot at his word. And by the way, we're going to get into where he misled you in a little bit. You're taking a ginormous risk by having him sign a contract for 30 days. And the first thing I told you is like, dude, you have to find a way to convince him to give you more time. So before we get into anything else, Eric, how did you convince this guy to give you more than 30 days to close?
Yeah, so it was really unique, and I'm glad you kind of are refreshing my memory at this point. You're bringing me back to the anguish, but no, so it was a pretty bad term as far as a closing date. So, like a lot of these sellers, they're being pounded on the phones. They're being promised the sun, the moon, the stars. I can close all cash within 30 days. Obviously, this seller had someone promise him some kind of closing within 30 days because he was very adamant that he wanted it closed really quickly. I was able to negotiate potentially 45 days there. But even at 45 days, it was going to be a major issue to get that closed. And so I got him signed up and came back, sent it off to the title company. And the more I spoke with Ryan about this situation, the more I realized that, I'm going to definitely need more time to be able to get this done. Maybe I could have wholesaled it. And that was kind of some of my thought process, worst case scenario, I can always bail and just wholesale it. But I wanted to do my first syndication. I wanted to do a syndication and syndicate the deal. And so I went deeper. And so I began to reach out to the seller and let them know that it was just completely unrealistic. I somewhat planted that seed in the beginning. Before I even caught the flight there, I was letting them know that 30 to 45 days, that's just not really a realistic, date that we can pursue here. And he realized that, but at the same time, he was an older seller, and he was really stuck in his ways. And that was another part of the risk. I was under those kind of terms. I knew that going in, but at the same time, I was consistently planting those seeds that, hey, this may take a little bit longer than 45 days, and kind of leading in with that. And he was somewhat receptive, but he was really adamant of really wanting to stay within that 30 to 45 day window. So got him under contract. I ended up going on vacation. Me and the family, we're in Walt Disney World. I'm working on this deal half the time. I'm enjoying the vacation the other half of the time. And I'm reaching out to the seller as well. And because I knew that it was becoming to the point where the deal was somewhat unraveling on me. And I knew that I needed more time. And he had a wife that was much more reasonable than him. And so I somewhat reached out to her, and I was able to communicate and share with her that we were going to need more time to be able to close this thing out. We were serious about closing. We wanted. I've been through the park. I've met the husband, and we're serious buyers. We're able to perform. And I just continually reassured that I'm all in. We're going to get this done for you. And it was the wife that tilted the scales. And so I was able to have an amendment drew up. I sent it off, and they granted me to be able to close the deal. They gave me the time that I needed. They gave me extensions that was contingent upon all the third-party reports, the phase one, the survey, the appraisals, all those things being able to be completed in order to get the deal completed. So they graciously signed it. And we was off to the races, and that brought me to the new phase of locating my team at that point.
We're going to talk about the next. I want to point out that throughout this whole story, everybody listening in, what I want you to pay extra close attention to is how many different ways, and we're obviously not going to cover everything, but there's so many different ways this deal could have and probably should have unraveled. And Eric's stubbornness was just elite. His ability to just have the right, again, mindset to say, like, not only am I going to close this, but I'm also going to close this myself. I'm not wholesaling this. I'm not taking a fee. I am doing this. And what I really want y'all to hear as you're listening to this is just the various twists and turns that this took, and the just absolute assiduous nature that just stubbornness in just a beautiful way that Eric had to get through this. Because I remember him telling me about this deal, and I was like, yes, oh my gosh, you got it under contract. Eric, this is incredible. And then he's like, I have 30 days to close. And I was like, no, what did you do? No. Oh my gosh. Okay. How are we going to fix it? Okay. So first off, super proud of you. You got it under contract. You wowed this seller like no one else had. But, oh no, we have 30 days to close this. And you just, again, it wasn't just finding extensions. There are several other things that should have and could have torpedoed this deal and didn't. But you wowed this seller. You wowed this seller. And I'm going to say something a little bit sensitive right now. So everybody brace for a second. A lot of these mom and pops, especially in the South, they're old, they're white, and they may not be directly racist, but there's a lot of them that, maybe they're not members of the Ku Klux Klan, but they certainly maybe say something or act a certain way. And you're like, I can tell that, Eric, you're African American. You have a old white guy looking at you, and you can probably tell to a certain degree he's thinking in the back of his mind, if this guy was white, it would be going a little bit differently. And it is an unfair thing you have to face. And you overcame even that, which makes me immensely proud. I hope I didn't offend anybody by that, but it's just, it's what that generation has done and gone through to the African American population is infuriating. And for you, Eric, to have that against you to whatever degree it was, and maybe it was nothing, maybe he's totally fine and normal, it just makes me so proud. So that's a little bit of an aside. And for all the other African Americans listening in, I want Eric to inspire you to know that there are old white people who probably have awful opinions, and you can fight through that. And it's going to be harder for you than it is for me. Let's put it out there. I'm white. It's going to be easier for me. I'm white, male, Christian. I have an unfair advantage. But Eric didn't care. And that just makes me emotional, for one, and inspired. And again, sorry if I'm offending anyone, but good for you, Eric. And shame on all those, folks that hold just awful opinions, and you just didn't let that get you down. So I want to say that you wowed this person. You overcame that. You overcame a way too short deadline. And you also had next to no time to do due diligence. So before we get into how we're going to figure out how we're going to find investors, how we're going to find bankers, how we're going to find operators, Eric, how did you do due diligence?
Yeah. So just to kind of circle back to your point of somewhat having some barriers being held against me because of being an African-American gentleman. So I'm a Black male Christian. And that's one thing that we had in common. Me and this gentleman, we met up on Sunday, and he was taking off from church to meet me. And we had a light conversation about our, church attendance and things like that, attended church. And so I'm not one of these guys that harbors on the past. I lean to my faith and forgiveness and just move on. So I blow past those kind of things. And I just look to just work my tail off. I'm not looking for any kind of handouts, and I just work like everyone else, and don't worry about what someone's views are to be able to get somewhere. But so just what remind me again, Ron? What was that? I wanted to.
I totally threw a wrench at you there, man.
Yeah, no problem.
I love to hear that. I really love to hear that, Eric. Again, you have such a wonderful attitude about life and an enthusiasm that's infectious. And it was just so bizarre to me when you joined the mentorship program, and I was like, we really have to fight through belief in yourself? Oh my gosh, you're such a wonderful human. How? And you did. But Eric, what I asked you is, you had 30 days. You had to do whatever you could do to buy more time just for the reporting. How did you do due diligence in that short time frame?
Yeah, so due diligence, once we got the extension, we were able to kind of breathe a sigh of relief at that point. Mm-hmm. So I ended up having to put $5,000 down. But the good thing is that the way that the contract was worded, basically, the inspection period never started at any point in time throughout the contract because they didn't perform according to the contract. So I was able to put forth the $5,000 with the title company. I knew that I would be able to recover that based off of my attorney. So we were in good position for that. But as far as being able to do the due diligence, a lot of that I was able to do from a distance, via phone calls and just kind of checking the boxes with the city and doing some diligence with previous contractors that's done work. But what was my best ally for due diligence was a fellow mentee from your program. And so I was able to connect with him. I remember that we had some conversations when I was coming to the program. He was leaving out. And so he had been in the program with you guys, working really closely. And I remember networking. That's something that I'm a strong advocate on, is network. You have to get connected. You have to speak with people. You have to be holding conversations to learn about others and to utilize your strengths and utilize their strengths. And I held a conversation with this mentee. After he had left, I reached out to him and to see how we may be able to help each other out down the line. And within that conversation, he mentioned the areas that he was interested in working in. And it just so happened to be the area, one of the metros that he was interested in is where the very park was. So I reached back into that database and I reached out to him. Once I showed him the deal, showed him the financials on the deal, he was all in. And so we had the boots on the ground piece that was taken care of, and due diligence, it was no longer an issue.
That was a big thing I wanted to talk to you about. Was you live states away and 2 plane rides away to get there. One of my first questions to you was, Eric, how the heck are you going to operate this thing? And the good news is that mentee, I went, that's one of such and such's primary markets. You ought to be in touch with them. And I didn't even need to tell you, man, you already were in touch with them, which is great. And even better than that, there's your operator, because he lives not far from there. So in terms of the operations, you found that pretty quick by networking. And another thing, 2 things that you had to run into is you're talking 45 days, give or take, to close. You need debt because you're not getting seller carry, you're not closing cash, and you need investors. And one thing that you and I spent a good chunk of time on, and while you were with me in the mentorship program, was underwriting. And you had just started back in the mentorship program when you got this thing under contract. This is one of the first calls, if not the first call. So we didn't really have a lot of time to go through underwriting. How did you overcome the debt piece and the investor piece, especially with underwriting being just an area of improvement for you?
So I leveraged the training that you gave me. So you were, and I was kind of really focused on underwriting, and you was kind of showing me some previous trainings that you have done within your coaching modules. And I was just pounding through that. I was working super hard, trying my best to comprehend exactly how to underwrite the deal. And I believe me and you even kind of sourced it just a little bit and just went through some underwriting there. But yeah, I mean, I was able to reach out to some debt partners. You had referred me to a couple of lenders, and one was a really solid person. But we ended up connecting with a mortgage broker, and he connected us with the local community bank, and we was able to gain some debt that way and get financing that way. And as far as investors, I'm a part of a pretty robust network of investors. So when I sold the park that I bought prior to getting back into the mentorship the second time there with you guys, I knew that I wanted to be in multifamily. And so I invested into another mastermind. And that particular mastermind, its investors are more focused on apartments, but they were intrigued by mobile home parks. And so I was kind of the lone ranger within that group of investors there. And I was kind of sharing some things that, hey, I've got mobile home park experience, and it was intriguing a lot of those guys. And so a lot of them were saying, hey, when you get something on the radar, let me know. And a lot of these guys also, they have some pretty deep pockets, and they decided to work with me, and that's where a lot of the raise and the funds to close the deal, that's where it came from.
Yeah, I remember I was on the way home from the airport, and our weekly call was one of your investors, and we just did a 3-way call, and he asked me some real tough questions. And I remember introducing you to, because I own, like I said, about an hour from there. I have 5 properties, about an hour and change from there. And so I introduced you to all my bankers, and you didn't even need it, man. You found your own, and you have your own network of investors. I happily helped a little bit. And I remember, man, on Sunday afternoons going through pro formas you were sending me and showing you where you were right, wrong, where you needed to think, where you needed to practice. And by the end, you were sending me pro formas where I didn't really have a whole lot of feedback for you. So I remember seeing improvement. But it all comes down to one word, man: networking.
Mm-hmm.
Debt, networking. Investors, networking. Operations, networking. It's all networking.
Yeah.
It was all networking. And again, like, the thing that makes Eric so special, if you can't hear it, if you haven't already heard it, Eric just has just some type of relentless energy about him where ridiculous things are thrown his way. Because, by the way, try telling a banker, hey, here's a guy who's several states over. I'm not going to be a part of the deal. You know how, Mr. Banker, you and I have done a bunch of deals. I'm not going to be a part of the deal. He's a friend of mine. I trust him. This is a pretty good deal. Why don't you have a look at it? And that was my conversation with a couple bankers I introduced you to. That was a stressful thing, trying to get the appraisals and phase ones and things going and quick because you have a tight timeline to close. That was stressful. Getting people who in your network, like you said, were mostly apartment folks on board with the idea of a mobile home park. That was tough. Oh, and by the way, you also had another deal under contract at that time that you ended up not doing, and I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah.
So that also had its own challenges that you and I were fighting through as best I could help you do. And so you were fighting a battle on multiple fronts, debt, equity, just seller relations, if you will, keeping them happy. Not even to mention due diligence, because the one thing that I want to talk about that was, I remember talking about, Eric, this might be a deal killer, which is the fact that we didn't know if we really had zoning, because there were 78 lots, but there's a bunch of them that were RVs. And of course, the seller was, oh, hey, yeah, whatever, the accounts they're paying, they're this, and that. Oh, just trust me, close quick, 30 days, da, 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 da. And I was like, Eric, I've done this before, man. Somebody wants to close quick, somebody wants all cash or quick close. Oh, yeah, trust me, things are looking good. Like, hey, he might be a great swell guy. You might go to church with him. He might be a true bona fide Christian. I know plenty of Christians that are Christians. And let me just tell you, this is one where you need to be extra careful in the due diligence. Why don't you talk for a minute about what was kind of the issue with zoning and how you resolved it?
Yeah, so zoning turned out to be a nightmare for us. So we ended up pushing off closing because of zoning. We didn't have to push it out too far, but we just needed some clarification because, of course, traditional mom and pop, they are not concerned about those kind of things. But with us syndicating the deal, we was going to have to pass that deal off eventually. And we needed to be able to assure that new buyer that they were getting a solid property, that RVs were zoned, that everything was good to go with the city. And so we ended up having to just pound the city. And thank God we had someone that was local, because we were trying to do it from a distance and we was getting stonewalled. We had a great attorney that was really working with us and was pounding the table, really trying to go to bat for us. But city, the planning and zoning, they just was very unresponsive. But the my partner that was local, he was able to continually keep showing up, getting in front of the people that was down there that was not answering the call, not responding to the emails. And he was even able to bring the seller with him. And so that also kind of assisted us because the seller was very difficult. When I say a difficult seller, he was kind of one of the worst. So the deal,
we haven't even talked about that. I remember how tough he was.
It's amazing.
I was shocked you even got him to sign the amendment to extend closing. Like going through his wife was brilliant. Yeah, I remember you just telling me. I'm like, man, I know that type.
Oh,
that alone was tough. Yeah,
this guy, I basically, I hate to say that this isn't going to make me sound the best, but I basically had to beg to keep the deal from falling apart. I had to jog his memory, and I was somewhat questioning if he had some like early stages of dementia. I wasn't 100% sure, but I think he was okay because it really didn't pop up too many more times down the road. But what I would do is just jog his memory that we had said that we had a deal. I would just refresh him on the gamble that I took with him. You know, I reminded him, hey, you know, I've been honoring everything that I said, and I would just pound that. Everything you've asked me to do, I've actually done that. You told me to jump on a plane, and I just went step by step, walking him through the process, and it really won him over. He was ready to pull the plug on the deal because I introduced him to my partner, and it was a shock. Once he saw another person enter into the transaction that he originally wanted 30 days to be closed, it was almost too much for him to take. And all throughout the beginning of the transaction, he continually reminded me that he wasn't even really sure why he chose me. You know, and that's not so much, I'm not looking at it from like a racial perspective or anything like that. His whole thought process was from the jump. He was telling me this. I get postcards all the time. I get pounded on the phone all the time. I'm not 100% sure why I chose you. And I think what your listeners could take away with this is just be consistent. It's not, you know, about being super special. It's not your script that's going to get you the deal. It's more or less hitting someone at the right time because he couldn't put his finger on why he chose me. But one thing that I can share is that earlier in that week leading up to me calling him, he said that he had an accident. He said he had failed. And when I got there in town, I mean, he was scarred up, Band-Aids on him. And he was saying that, hey, it's time for him to just kind of walk away from the deal. He's 81. He want to enjoy life. He was liquidating some properties. So the moral of the story, be consistent. That's the greatest thing that I've learned with off-market deals and trying to get direct to seller. It's just being consistent. Pound the phones, send the mail, stay consistent because you never know when you're going to touch someone at the right time.
Eric, and I said that on your podcast a little earlier. I think what makes me special and what allowed me to buy 68 properties, almost 4,000 units, is the fact that I just show up again and again and again. I'm not that good looking or smart or hardworking or charismatic. I'm just not. I just show up every darn day. And I do what I know you have to do to be successful. And it's nothing sexy. It just isn't. It just isn't. And what I really hope to, I want to wind this down. What I really, really hope that folks get out of this is just that, Eric, it was a roller coaster. And we've barely touched the real specifics and nitty gritty of this deal. We could talk for hours about any one of the things we've mentioned, and there's a ton we haven't even talked about. And it was so tough. It was a roller coaster. It was a nightmare. You have pressure from multiple angles. You have pressure from the lender. You have pressure from your investors. You have pressure from the seller who is tough. You have an impossible job. I mean, and I almost feel guilty because my gut reaction is, dude, what are you doing? There's no way you're going to get this done. And I feel bad because I did my best to like bite my tongue and not be like, oh my gosh, okay, look, good work putting it under contract. Let's figure out how to get this done. And you just took it like a champ, like an absolute champ, because Eric, throughout all these things that were stacked against you, you found a way to close. You found a way to pull this off, and you found a way to keep it yourself, not wholesale it. Again, I gave you an easy out and you didn't take it. You went and you did it. And that to me is the exciting part about this story. And now I'm going to take this full circle. Because I'm going to say that's just chapter 1. Now you've closed it and you're going to own it for X number of years. And there's going to be another million different ridiculous things that are going to feel impossible and be a nightmare and a roller coaster and this and the other thing. Because now you own it. Now you've manufactured and produced the deal and closed it. And now you got to run the thing. And what I will tell anyone who's listening in who hasn't bought a property yet, who really wants to buy a mobile home park, listening to this story, listening to the type of person you have to be, like Eric, who's very rare, to even get a deal done, because Eric was probably one of the only people who could buy this park because this guy was so difficult and this deal so problematic. I mean, there's a lot of things that zoning thing alone might have scared me off from buying a deal like this. The fact that there are RVs might have scared a lot of people off. The fact that Eric just refused to let negativity talk him out of going forward, let the near impossibility talk him out of going forward, and that only to be the beginning of the story of this mobile home / RV park. Because don't forget, now you got to execute the turnaround. If that scares you, if that makes you go, man, I don't know if I want to do mobile home parks or RV parks or real estate, I have to tell you, you probably won't then, because you have to have that tenacity. You have to be that consistent and methodical and even keeled emotionally. Like, one thing that I don't know if you're hearing from Eric is he has a positive, upbeat attitude in general. When bad things happen, he kind of goes about it very nonchalantly. You have to have that kind of astronaut mentality. And Eric's got that in droves, and that's what you need. You don't need to be an expert pro forma writer or expert salesperson or expert this, that, and the other thing. You just need to be consistent. You need to have that positive attitude that Eric has. And then you just need to be ready for the long haul, because it's never going to end. It never gets easy owning these properties. And I really wanted to, Eric, have you on here to tell that story, to really explain to folks the sacrifice and the years you've spent at this, and the just everything that went into this deal to go off market. Because the other option, by the way, is to just pay whatever anybody wants and overpay like crazy. And even if you do that, because by the way, I've outbid people to buy fully marketed deals. Even when you do that, it's tough. So Eric, I want to really thank you for coming on and giving a really, really honest and, to a certain degree, very emotional story about how you got this done. A very humble story too, about how you got this done, the mistakes you made, your willingness to put yourself out there, again, is a testament to who you are as a person. And I told you this, man, like, I don't care if you're, coming from construction for 17 years, or if you're straight out of Harvard MBA and you know how to do pro formas in your sleep and you got tons and oodles of experience. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care who I want to surround myself with, and who I will bet heavily on is someone like you. because you're just, dude, you're not going to let anything get you down. So, ladies and gentlemen, 2 things. Number 1, consistency. And number 2, find a way to be like Eric. His attitude is amazing. Eric, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's a joy to have you in my life, man. And it's so cool watching you succeed.
Well, Ron, I definitely appreciate you for having me on. And I know this, your podcast has exploded. So just to be in this kind of company and definitely to be in your company is, it's just awesome. And so one thing I can close with, and what was the biggest, most pivotal piece to this deal was when you just basically told me, hey, it's all about mindset. I was locked in on underwriting and trying to master this. And you basically just stepped away and said, hey, you've got it. It's all within your mindset. And so, I definitely appreciate that, Ron. And I really value our relationship.
Eric, I just, man, I couldn't believe it when I couldn't get you off that for weeks. Like, I feel like I'm not underwriting strong enough and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, Eric, man, you have that swag. You've got it. Just need to apply it here too. And dude, when you had it, it was like, get out of your way, man. I could go on and on about how proud I am of what you did there and everything, but I would rather have folks discover that themselves by meeting you. So Eric, how can people find you?
Yeah, so I've got a website that I like to send people to. So I syndicate apartments at mobile home parks, and the website that people can reach out to me on is moonlightcre.com. So just as moonlightcre.com. And I'd love to connect with you guys if you want to work together on some syndications on the apartment side or mobile home parks.
Eric, I will drop that website in the show notes. So anyone listening in, Eric can be found there. Worth reaching out to. The guy's an absolute inspiration. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. And Eric, can't thank you enough for coming on, man.
No problem.
Rock and roll.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.